So I'm really glad to be back here this year again. Thank you very much for JFrog for organizing this show again, and thank you for everyone for coming to this event. So in the past few years, I've been making this pitch that the software is increasingly becoming more and more important part of the value that the company creates, right? There's all these companies that showing up in the existing space, disrupting the existing players, and now all these other guys suddenly discovering themselves that they need to scramble to meet the new way of delivering software. And then that's creating this interesting disruption throughout the market. Now, Jenkins is kind of at the in the middle of this disruption that's going on, right? We are at the heart of the DevOps and the continuous delivery movement. So Jenkins, after more than 10 years, it's still growing at incredible pace. I still don't know. It shows the world's appetite for the software development. So this is tracking the number of jobs that grows over the past 2 years. And what's even more amazing is that if you look at the newer part of Jenkins, so again, I've been here for the past few years talking about the pipeline as a better way of doing Jenkins. And that part is growing at a far more incredible pace than the rest of the Jenkins. And another way to look at this appetite for the DevOps and continuous delivery is the fact that there are local meetups that we organize around the world. We call the Jenkins Area Meetup. Is now connecting 24,000 people around 59 locations throughout the world, including Tel Aviv. So thanks, guys. And I had the pleasure of meeting the people who organized some of these events yesterday, and it was awesome. So clearly, I think the industry is shifting and evolving rapidly in the way from recognition to this better software development to how to develop the software themselves. And then in order to meet that evolution, Jenkins also needs to evolve to keep up with that demand. Because if you think about it, the bar of the expectation that the people have for the development tools is getting higher and higher, right? Back then, it used to be okay to write a shell script and hook that up with a cron tab and send the email, and then that was the continuous integration server, right? But nowadays, thanks to the CI or CD as a service, like a CodeShip or Travis, or the fact that so many more people are doing this, that means we need to provide a much better ease of use or much higher level of the scalability, or generally help people just get the stuff done without spending too much time so that they can focus on the important part. So at the Jenkins project, we've been working really hard at that. That's exactly what we have been doing. And not only, so I like to think of it as turbocharging Jenkins with a new superpower so that it can help you better, right? And not only we are working on one thing, we are working on developing 5 things at the same time. So how about that? How crazy is that? So today I wanted to talk a bit about all these new efforts that we are taking on in the Jenkins project to make you to give you the superpower necessary to deliver software faster. Aside from being a founder of Jenkins, I'm also a CTO of the CloudBees, and I'm also very proud that the CloudBees, the company behind company that I'm involved in, is leading or contributing to all these 5 efforts. So for those of you who don't know who we are, we are the largest corporate sponsor behind Jenkins. We have a good number of the Jenkins contributors on our payroll, and we help the large enterprise deliver end-to-end the continuous delivery system in which Jenkins plays an incredibly important role. Right? We have a booth outside, and I'd love to talk to you more about what we do and how we can help organizations go through the continuous delivery journey. But suffice to say, this is why we are spending a lot of effort into moving Jenkins forward. So what are we actually doing inside the Jenkins project? So let's look at the pipeline, right? So I showed you the graph earlier about why the pipeline is so important and why it's a newer part of the Jenkins. As the usage grows, obviously we need to make pipeline even more rock solid, right? And then so we are actually approaching this in the 2 ways. The one is the iterative approach. The great thing about open source is we can keep on working at the same problem for years or even decades, whereas sometimes in commercial entities, like you do one thing and the next year you're doing something else. So we are now making a lot of iterative improvements of our pipeline as more and more people use pipeline in exciting or crazy ways, and then so the pipeline is getting better, one PR at a time. But we're also looking at some pretty fundamental change that solves some entire classes of the problems in the pipeline. And this is still very early in the design discussion, so I don't want to describe this as a done deal. But we think we can sort of not only make the Jenkins pipeline far more rock solid, but also in much less code for us to maintain, which in turn help us do other things, right, faster. So that's what we are working on in the pipeline, and then this is obviously a very important effort for us. The Blue Ocean is another companion to the pipeline, right? I think the last year and maybe also the year before I talked about the impact of the Blue Ocean. This is a new user interface for Jenkins, and from the community I've been hearing the great news about that. So I'd like to think of the first stage of this Blue Ocean rocket has been hugely successful. If you haven't already been using Blue Ocean, you really should. Now, but what's the next second stage of this rocket? So I think that's what we are working on right now. And in my mind, that second stage of rocket is to enable the community to build on top of Blue Ocean so that they can add more things that they're used to seeing in the rest of the classic Jenkins UI. So in the Jenkins community, we have one of the ethos, one of the DNA of how we do things is the extensibility. This idea that we can craft the software in such a way to allow other people to build on top of it. So that's exactly what we are adding. And then when this happens, I think it's amazing things are going to happen because all these people who have developed 14 or 1600 plugins can now start contributing on top of Blue Ocean and then make their plugin really work well or represented well inside the Jenkins project. So those are the sort of the things that we are working on the pipeline and the Blue Ocean. Now I wanted to look at some another ambitious effort that we are taking on, which is what we call the cloud native Jenkins. So now this is a superpower we are trying to give you, right? So try to imagine like, well, if you're running Jenkins, I suspect some of you had this experience where you're trying to head home in the the Thursday afternoon, and then like you get this emergency frantic phone call from somebody that, hey, like, okay, Jenkins is down and I can't get the release shipped, so we really need to get this fixed ASAP, and you have to put in a lot of extra effort. Like, what if you could completely eliminate that possibility because Jenkins does not have any single point of failure anymore, right? I think that would be pretty amazing, don't you think? All right, maybe not. I think it's pretty amazing, actually. Or how about the disaster recovery in Jenkins is as easy as just launching a new Jenkins container somewhere else, and then you don't have to think about how to replicate the file system or do any of the other crap that you have to do today, right? And then because I think we can give you that because we can move the data from the file system that is today to the more managed cloud-native data storage. I think that would be a pretty awesome thing. Or what about you don't have to do the upfront provisioning of the S3 or EBS volume to run the Jenkins on the AWS? Or what about you can run not only one or two more order of magnitude more Jenkins workload in a single deployment? So for example, even the biggest company in the world could run the whole thing on the one Jenkins installation as opposed to having so many. Does that sound exciting to you? Because if not, I'm not going to start working on it. No. Thank you. So these are, in many ways, I think the fundamental problems that many people have told us for the longest time. And finally, I think the Jenkins project is working on those because we now have the cycles and power and bandwidth to take on these big challenges. So this is why we take on this new important effort called Cloud Native Jenkins, in which, roughly speaking, we can describe it as the two key goals. The one is to remove the file systems as a data storage and move it to more cloud native storage, and also move away from the single process Jenkins as a single point of failure to more of a, the multi-node, multi-process, more like a function of the service kind of world where no single component can take down the entire Jenkins. So that's what we call the cloud in Jenkins. And this effort is already underway, and then some of the features is about to ship or has already shipped. So we are starting with the moving the artifacts move that into S3, and then we are also now moving the build logs, so the ones that you see in the console output. Now we are working on pushing that through the FluentD, so we can send it to all sorts of different backends. The first one we are working on is the AWS. So just between those two things, so we are starting with those two things, which actually is about one of the most bulkiest read-only data that the Jenkins ever has. So just when we are done with this, already we can ship the 80% of data into some read-only storage like S3 and CloudWatch. And then over time, we're going to take on the rest of the Jenkins the file system over to the proper cloud-native storage. So with this way, we can give you the much smaller Jenkins home, which is easier to back up or navigate around with cheaper storage cost, the better utilization of the cloud resources, and faster build time and all that stuff. And then more, I think this really is, I think, these are very exciting places for Jenkins. So I'm very excited about that. So that was a pretty amazing improvement for anyone using Jenkins already and seriously. But these people are in for a treat because they are getting even more superpowers. So the next one, yeah, I like that, thank you. So the next one that I wanted to talk about is the configuration as code effort. So what do I mean by that, right? So, how many of you felt like when you're touching Jenkins, like you're changing the new Jenkins configuration or installing the new plugins has been a little scary experience for them because you never know what's gonna happen, right? So imagine you can apply a same change control process, the same thing that you apply, same process that you apply to your source code changes, like code review, changes in the version control repository, and then rolling deployment and the ability to roll back and forward and stuff like that. And that's what the Jenkins configurations code can give you as a superpower, right? Or what if you can Jenkins stops being a snowflake, meaning you can make changes to its configuration confidently because you know exactly why every part of the configuration was made by who, when. So you can go back to the history, see why it's done that way, and talk to the guy to figure out if your next change is making sense. Or what if you can safely roll back a failed upgrade? And that confidence, I think, is going to be amazing for many people. And all of that we can do if we have the Jenkins configuration captured as a series of the configuration files. So this is the effort that's happening right now. It's the collaboration between Pragma and CloudBees. So this is another great example in which the open source project is driving different companies to work together to make something valuable faster, right? And the way you go about this is you write Jenkins configuration in a YAML file and then just put that into the Git repository, right? And then you can define everything from the security setting to your Active Directory to what plugins that you install to the email server locations or whatever, right? And then we are working toward, we'd like to give you all the necessary tools to help you write this productively, from the documentation to the syntax check to whatnot. And then once you have this file, you can just launch Jenkins as a Docker container by pointing to this configuration file, and then Jenkins come up always exactly the same way as you configured it, right? So now it's obvious how you can do all the usual things that you're used to. So this effort has been also underway for quite some time now, and then it's already, we haven't gone to the 1.0 yet, but it's already at the point that we are producing 8 releases so far, and making lots of improvements rapidly. And we've been hearing great feedback from the people. So if you wanted to use it, I think this is a great time to get going in this direction, and you can look for Jenkins configurations code to see how you can start doing this today. And then just to give you an example, this is a kind of the configuration file that you'll be writing. And I think it's quite so much more readable than, let's say, people who might have been doing XML templating stuff. This configuration as code effort has a little bit of a tortured history. The need for doing this has been recognized for such a long time, But it took it took us this long to actually rally the effort together into one thing. But finally, we are building like a one solution to rule them all. Like this is a one thing to rule all the plugins, or including CloudBees product. You can make the entire Jenkins configuration work in this confinement. So that's really amazing effort that's going on here. So let's say, I talked a lot about the expanding capabilities of the Jenkins for the serious users, right? Now, what if you are already happy with the existing feature set, right? What are the superpowers that we can give you that? What are the superpowers that we can give you for people who are already happy? Now, I mean, so now that brings me to the Jenkins Essentials, which actually has its own mascot, not the superhero Jenkins. So in Jenkins Essentials, what we are trying to do is to create a radically simplified Jenkins. Because even if your use case might not be all that complicated or sophisticated, perhaps because of that, keeping Jenkins easier is actually even more valuable for you, right? So what we are trying to do is for users, there's actually multiple goals here, but what we are trying to do for the users is to give users a pre-assembled batteries included Jenkins ready to go from the get-go without doing, let's say, any plugin installations or like as little configuration as possible, right? So my pitch to the team, and then I did this in the Jenkins world in San Francisco last year, was that we want people to be able to go from 0 to production within like just 5 clicks and 5 minutes. So that's the kind of the level of ease of use that I think the modern software developer expects, thanks to all these software as a service offerings. So that's the one that we are trying to compete against here. And then also important part of the making Jenkins easier and then simplify is to reduce the overhead of the babysitting, right? So the Jenkins administrator today, needs to upgrade Jenkins, install the plugins and update the plugins, pay some attention to the security advisories and stuff like that. Now, in Jenkins Essentials, we are trying to eliminate those needs. For the Jenkins project, this actually also has a very important, significant meaning, because I think sometimes we explain this Jenkins community as building this bucket full of Lego blocks, which is the plugins, and then everyone is building these interesting blocks that can be combined into some interesting ways. But what it does is what it makes it difficult is for the people in the community to collectively work together this Jenkins as a whole thing that you are using. And the people tend to see their own little things of the plugins and then the whole thing as the sum of the plugins. And that creates unfortunate gap in the usability and stuff. So what I'm hoping is that when the Jenkins Essentials becomes this, let's say, a distribution of Jenkins that a lot of people are using, then the community developers should start thinking of that as the delivery vehicle, not their plugins. So in order to achieve those things, Jenkins core alone is not sufficient. So we are drawing this, what I call the brighter lines of features around what we think is the essential user experience of Jenkins. And in modern Jenkins, that includes things like pipeline, Blue Ocean, Git support, or the GitHub and Docker, or the Kubernetes build agent, that sort of things, right? So we want to take responsibility onto ourselves to build the best feature surfaces of Jenkins and then give that to you. It's kind of a little bit like a Linux distribution versus Linux kernel. Like the kernel will be still available, and then people who want to do things like a Gen 2 can do that. But for other people who just want a functioning Linux server or Linux desktop or media center, we can give you the right solution from the get-go so that you don't have to assemble these pieces. Or like when the GNOME Foundation says they have a number of the GUI projects, these projects are not working independently, right? They are working collectively together to create a good desktop experience. So that's what we are trying to aim in the Jenkins project as well. So the key vehicle, sort of like a key idea behind making all of this goal work is this notion of connected, auto-upgrading distribution of Jenkins. sometimes think of it as like as a Google Chrome, right? The browser used to be this thing where you have to manually upgrade to newer versions. And then Firefox came with like this, well, like an annoying update reminder, like every time you have to press the button to get updated. And the kind of Chrome took it one step further by eliminating that from the user interface altogether. So you're not going to update really Chrome at all, but it's doing it behind the scene. And occasionally you have to restart it. So that's only like a rough surfaces. But what we are trying to do in Jenkins Essentials is actually exactly the same. I'm trying to take on the responsibility of upgrading onto us, the community, from you. And right off the bat, I think this is a huge saving. So everything within that brighter line, all the plugins and core, it's going to be managed by us. So we are responsible for keeping your Jenkins instance up and running, delivering the updates at the right time. And then so that cuts off the biggest overhead right there. And then also, I think this is also beneficial to users because you are running exactly the same configuration that we have tested, and also so many other people are running. So when somebody hits a problem, like we can see that and we can fix it, and then we can deliver that to you before you see those problems, right? So there's this safety in the number factor as well. And I think that also we are making this more reliable than the way you might be running Jenkins yourself, because we are building systems like automatic snapshotting of the data so that when the upgrade fails, we can roll back quite safely. Or the fact that when the Jenkins boots up, Jenkins Essentials boots up, it makes sure that it can run in your environment correctly, right? So this extra diagnosis and monitoring, extra diagnosis and the safety mechanism allow us to deliver updates more safely to you. And also, the Jenkins Essential is connected. So things that's happening on your instance, be it the performance or the strange stack traces or whatever, it's going to be coming back to the community. And I mean, as a community, we are hearing from all the installation of Jenkins Essentials as opposed to your particular one. So that allows us to close the feedback loop a whole lot faster, right? Today, if you think about it, the way the feedback cycle of the software development in Jenkins is like we ship a new version of Jenkins or the plugins, people upgrade that, and then people notices that there's something not quite working, and they file a ticket, and then the developer go back to the issue tracker to try to find what went wrong, right? So that cycle is easily taking like days or weeks. Now, if you are having this auto-upgrade in Jenkins that's connected, we can start getting the production feedback within minutes or hours. And then that's the speed in which now we can deliver the changes or the fixes to you. And then, so while the idea of Jenkins constantly upgrading behind the scene might sound a little scary to you, but I think this is actually the right thing to do for us to deliver software faster, deliver better software more reliably and faster. That's kind of what the continuous delivery is all about, right? So we are trying to actually do that in Jenkins by ourselves. So the other part of Jenkins Essentials is to simplify. So one of the things that we are working hard on is to try to add more sane defaults so that you don't have to do as much manual configuration as possible. We want to constrain the environment in which this can run, for example, so that it senses the environment it's in and it be able to do the right things. So for example, the cloud native Jenkins effort that I mentioned, the initial target implementation is AWS. So when you deploy Jenkins Essentials in AWS, then we'd like to be able to leverage those capabilities so that you don't have to install and configure S3 and credential and whatnot to make this thing happen. It automatically happens for you. So that's the kind of the world that we can provide, which allows you to go from 0 to production in just 5 clicks and 5 minutes. That's the goal. The other part of making things easier is by having some bits of the glue services on the community infrastructure, because this industry has developed all sorts of interesting ways where the services can interact with each other to get things done more easily. Like authentication with GitHub button would be a good example, or like the add to Slack is another a great example. So we can leverage these technologies if you have also the server pieces, service piece that's running, representing your Jenkins. So again, here a little bit of connectivity would allow us to provide a greater user experience And then that allows us to sort of make Jenkins feel a lot more easy and connected, just like a SaaS offering. And then another opportunity that we are taking the Jenkins Essentials is to create this obvious path to success. So for example, take Blue Ocean, for example, right? That is the primary user interface for the developers using Jenkins. But because there's also this classic UI and whatnot, it's not the default. Like it's not the default user experience in Jenkins yet. Like if you land to Jenkins, you don't see Blue Ocean. So with the Essentials, we want to do far more aggressive curations and then sort of disable and hide legacy feature of Jenkins that doesn't really have a good place in today's typical usage. So instead of giving you 1,000 different ways, we want to give you much smaller number of choices that we think make sense. We want people to be using it. And then that provides this guardrail and the lead path so that you don't end up wandering into strange places and get lost. So I think that makes the users a lot more productive because we want to make sure that the natural use of the software kind of leads to the successful places, as opposed to in Jenkins, there's always this perpetual feed of, okay, I put together this in certain way, but did I do that right? How other people are doing it, etc. And then perhaps like as I kind of representing the Jenkins developer community, the real reasons, let's see. So one of these, so this is actually a very significant change for the Jenkins development community because of this like instant feedback cycle that we create, which allows us to work on changes in a lot smaller increments. Today, every change we ship in some plugins needs to think about the compatibility with all the other plugins and all sorts of other versions. When we fix a set of plugins to give you as the one thing, Jenkins Essentials, we have a lot more wiggle room to play in these spaces. So the net result, I think, is we can work on more impactful changes, like the cloud-native Jenkins architecture, in much more safer and faster way. So that allows us to evolve Jenkins a whole lot more quickly, or in a much smaller effort. And that, in turn, gives us more power to meet your needs in better and faster way. So that's really the kind of the motivation behind Jenkins Essentials for us, not only to serve you better, but to give the Jenkins community itself the superpower to move faster. All right, so last but not least, the Jenkins X is another exciting superpower that we are working in the Jenkins community right now, right? So, because there's this like a great convergence happening around what I think of a new operating system in the cloud. It's the Kubernetes. There's some interesting technical pieces in there. There's also the fact that a lot of platforms is consolidating around this AWS finally, like grudgingly. So this is exciting technology and no doubt. But you still have to learn, in order to properly utilize this, you still have to go through a lot of processes. You have to install and operationalize Kubernetes, and it's not the easiest system to install because of all the sophisticated network virtualization and stuff like that it does. And the ecosystem is also moving really, really rapidly, right? There's all sorts of interesting tools and additional middleware services that's coming out, and then you need to learn to use them. And not only that, you have to move your app itself to the containers and figure out how to deploy containers to Kubernetes. Like, I'm going to just write the pod file, or you're going to do the Helm chart or whatnot. And then you have to finally wire up all the automation so that when the PR happens, like the right thing happens, and how and when you do the deployment and stuff like that. So it's kind of fun as a geek that, you can tinker on these technologies and find the right way to assemble those. But really, what we should be doing is actually writing the software that help our customers, right? So instead of, you could tinker, so you can either learn with all this technology, and then also figuring out the best practices. Okay, so this is one way to do it. Yeah, I assemble this in certain ways. But is that the right way to do it? Is that the best way to do it? There's a fear of missing out that, well, maybe I didn't, this new tool came out last week, coming out from Google. Does that mean I have to change this thing that I've been doing? So all this tinkering and learning and figuring out the right practice for your company can take time and effort. So you can either have fun doing that, or you can just use Jenkins X and then get productive. So that's the key idea behind Jenkins X. So the vision of the Jenkins X is really that we want to figure out, we the Jenkins community, we want to figure out the right best practices of how to do continuous delivery of the cloud-native applications. And when I say the continuous delivery here, I don't mean just running, build, and testing, but the entire process from the coding to the changes going into the production. So that includes things like how the PR review happens, what kind of automation kicks in there, the act of promotion in which like a binary bits go from one environment to another, or creating the change log so that the operations team can know what's incoming and all that stuff. Right? And we want to integrate in the best of the breed software in this ecosystem because we have people who are spending every day, every waking hours looking into, having fun with tinkering these technologies. And then finally, democratize these best practices by hiding all things, everything under a pleasant command line interface that you can interact with. So, and then that when you talk to that CLI, you're talking at the higher level concept, and and then behind the scene, it talks with all the right tools and makes stuff happen. So, I guess it really is a way of turning Kubernetes into a means to the end, which is the writing application faster that deliver value to your customer, right? So, and then the great thing about it is this best practices that we preach isn't something like we had to invent out of thin air, right? I mean, people are already kind of doing these things for quite a while. We just thought a lot harder about it and then tried to kind of crystallize it, right? So, some of the ingredients of these best practices include things like, okay, let's use cloud as much as possible to develop instead of trying to recreate the environment on your laptop to do the proper development. And people kind of want to have these multiple environments where the changes are going through between them. And then we call that moving of the binary from one place to another promotion. There's this thing called the GitOps, which is this idea that the state of the running system should be recorded as a Git commit so that you can see exactly what versions of what components were running where at any given time. And then this is also a useful way of tracking, provide the audit trail and the ability to roll back and stuff like that. And to corroborate changes in the pull request, and then when the changes merge into the master should be always a reliable, a releasable state. So anyway, none of these things should be really new, or the surprise, right? But when you combine this all together and then make it a really nice experience, then it makes you incredibly more productive. Another way to look at this perhaps is sometimes, I guess, people ask me so what is Jenkins X? Is that a new version of Jenkins? Do I need to upgrade to Jenkins X? So I wanted to, I've been thinking about what's the best way to explain Jenkins X and Jenkins X. Jenkins and Jenkins X. Actually, which one? So the Jenkins, I think the one way to look at Jenkins is maybe it's like a road network, right? So you can drive a car to anywhere in the world so long as you're in the driving seat and you know where to turn, right? So Jenkins is a very flexible system. So if you assemble the right pieces, and then maybe you can even add your own, then you can do everything from the web app development to game development to mobile development to whatever, right? Jenkins X is a little bit more like a high-speed rail. The idea being there's this one particular kind of app that a lot of people want to develop, one destination that a lot of people want to go, and so long as your destination is that place, then you can just hop onto this chain and you can just sit back and relax, and then we can take you there very fast in a very pleasant experience. And that one destination being web applications running on the Kubernetes. So it's by focusing on that one use case, we make things a whole lot easier, is what we are trying to do here. So just to give you some, it's kind of hard to explain, to get this idea across in abstract concepts. So briefly, I wanted to show what it really means to hide these all sorts of tools and systems behind a pleasant CLI. So, let's say, imagine you want to get the Jenkins X going, right? So you can, if you're on the Mac, you can install this from Brew, and then the first command you can type in the JX create cluster. And just by doing that behind the scene, like you get the Kubernetes actually deployed on one of the cloud providers that you choose, and then on which you get all the right tools pre-configured, properly deployed, including Jenkins, but a lot more. For example, the artifact repository, the monocular, all these tools that some of those you might not even heard of, but it's useful. That's a great example of us being able to survey the ecosystem and find the right tool for you so that you don't have to worry about that. And you also get, just by running this command, you also get the staging and production environments that the apps can run in. Right? How much simpler can it get? All right, so now that you have the system deployed, okay, let's prepare your app to be running on Jenkins X. You can either create a brand new project, kind of like a skeleton generator, like JX create Spring, that will create a Spring application, or you can make your existing application work in Jenkins X by writing JX import. So when you run one or the other command, what happens behind the scene is like we give you the source code, we wire up all the build and deployment and CD by creating files like Jenkins file, which is CD process definition, or Docker file, which sort of shows you how to package up your app, or the Helm chart, which describes how to deploy that into Kubernetes. The great thing about it, it all gets generated for you, so you don't have to learn about these things from the beginning. As you get more sophisticated, you might want to start tweaking some of these things, but you're not paying that cost up front. And then behind the scene, it also talks to the bunch of other services to make sure that the necessary things are wired up. So it creates a repository on GitHub, imports the source code there, set up the webhook on Jenkins so that the Jenkins can start building as soon as you push up the new changes, create the Jenkins job, and all that work that previously had to do one at a time manually is all taken care of. Right, under this CLI command. And then start building this initial commit, and then by the time, and then within a few minutes, your app is actually already running in the staging. So that's how much productivity boost we can give you right off the bat. All right, so now you have the app, so let's work on the change, right? So there's nothing new here. You work on your changes locally. Maybe you're using IDE, VI, whatever, and then you push that up and then create a PR on GitHub. And then you have that change reviewed by other team members and merged, right? No rocket science here. But when you do that, what happens behind the scene is as soon as you create the PR, your stuff gets automatically built and tested, and the app gets deployed into this elastic PR, like a pull request specific preview environment, meaning you have the entire dedicated copy of the app that people can look at when they do the code reviews. And that link is posted into PR, so anyone can click that link to see that in action. And when you merge the change, the master gets automatically also built and tested. And we create the new releases for you, and it's a proper change log for the changes that happen in there. And then the app gets automatically deployed to staging. All of that without, in this case, not touching any command in Jenkins X at all. And that's the power of the wiring up all the right tools in the right manner can give you. Again, none of this, you can do that by tinkering these things like this on your own, or just you can just get productive by using Jenkins X, right? So does that start to make sense, like what we are trying to do? Like, we try to remove all this like a gluing work from you. And our final step is, all right, so let's try to promote the app. So like you're happy with the staging. So let's move this app from staging into production. Well, you can run the command like JX promote, and then specify the version to release. Remember that version gets automatically created in the previous step, and then tell Jenkins X to move it to productions. And then what this does is create a pull request on this like a GitHub. So this is the GitOps part, and then somebody else can come in, like an ops team, for example, could say yes, this new deployment is approved, and they press the PR button. And then like after a little bit of time, like the new version appears in production. So all that sort of stuff, is this kind of workflow, you can get that instantly just by running those few commands in the Jenkins X. So that's the power of the Jenkins X. And we're also building at the CloudBees the companion product that goes with Jenkins X that gives you this like a view into what's actually happening. So that's part of what we are working on, and I think I'm very excited about that in the Jenkins X. So the thing about all this, I talked about these superpowers. The thing about these superpowers that we are working on the Jenkins project is that they are designed to work together, right? So, for example, the configurations code and then this cloud native Jenkins architecture is working together to make Jenkins even more stateless. The configurations code is taking configuration part of the state away from the Jenkins home, and the cloud native Jenkins stuff is taking the build records and log files and artifacts away from the Jenkins file, Jenkins home. So they are designed to kind of complement each other, right? Or likewise, another way to look at this is like we are trying to make Jenkins more immutable, read-only kind of system in which Blue Ocean and configurations code is working together, right? One of the earlier conversations I had in my booth is that somebody asked me, so this configuration screen, like is that coming, is the Blue Ocean going to start to cover that soon? Well, my answer is, well, we don't really need to do that anymore because we are trying to move the configuration over to the text files. Right? And then we have a number of these efforts going on, really designed to make Jenkins easier, and then behind the scenes, they rely on some of the earlier superpowers that we create. So that's, in a nutshell, we are working on these like 5 superpowers in Jenkins to make you better, to serve you better. And then so that's that makes 2018 a pretty exciting year for Jenkins project, and hopefully to you as well. So that's kind of it, what I wanted to talk about. I'd love to hear from your thoughts on whether we are working on the right things. I'm really happy of all the things that we are working on, but if you disagree or if you agree, just stop by and then grab a stickers and tell me accordingly. Now, so that's my end of my part. Now I'd like to invite so let's see. So now I've been talking all about, okay, what Jenkins is trying to meet your needs, right? Now I want to invite Yoav on stage, and he's going to talk about where you actually are today. So is that, Yoav, come on up, and thank you very much.